Hello everyone. Welcome to SHR Trinity. Today, we begin our prompt engineering interview series with zero-shot prompting. We will cover the foundational interview questions on zero-shot, explaining how to instruct a model without providing any examples. Let's get started. Before we begin, if you're looking for practical, industry-oriented training in artificial intelligence and generative AI, SHR Trinity offers a comprehensive 30-hour training program. For complete course details, check the description below. Now let's begin today's interview session. We will now begin with the first 10 questions of our zero-shot prompting interview series. Moving on to our next question, suppose you're working on a chatbot project. The client asks you to generate responses without providing any examples. How would you approach this problem?
When a client asks for response generation without providing any training or sample data, the primary solution is zero-shot prompting. Large language models are pre-trained on massive datasets containing billions of text tokens, meaning they already possess extensive language comprehension and domain knowledge. Instead of showing the model examples of what a good output looks like, we rely entirely on clear, structured directions to trigger its pre-existing capabilities. To execute this effectively, your prompt must contain a precise task description, explicit instructions, and strict output formatting constraints. Structuring the prompt with delimiters helps isolate instructions from input data, preventing unpredictable outputs. Let's walk through our example step by step. Imagine a customer support chatbot receiving an incoming email that says, "I cannot log into my account." In a zero-shot prompt, you would directly instruct the model, classify the following email into one of three categories: billing, tech support, or sales. Notice how we don't give any past examples of support tickets. The model analyzes the semantic context of cannot log in, maps it to technical access issues using its pre-trained weights, and outputs tech support. A common pitfall candidates make in interviews is assuming zero-shot requires vague prompts like help the user. Always explain to the interviewer that zero-shot prompts must be hyperspecific and that zero-shot acts as your initial performance benchmark before escalating to few-shot techniques.
Moving on to our next question, imagine you're designing prompts for an AI assistant that summarizes documents. Under what conditions would you choose zero-shot prompting?
In document summarization, zero-shot prompting is often the ideal choice under three specific conditions: when the task is standard, when you need to optimize token costs, and when sample outputs are missing. Summarization is a core foundational capability of modern large language models. Because LLMs already understand how to compress text and highlight key insights, providing extra examples in the prompt is often unnecessary and wastes valuable token capacity. By using zero-shot prompting, you keep your context window payload minimal, which directly cuts down API request latency and operational expenses. Let's examine how this works in practice with our 10-page legal contract example. When you feed a long document into an LLM, the source text itself consumes thousands of tokens. Adding multi-page reference summaries as few-shot examples would quickly hit context window boundaries and significantly increase cost. Instead, you supply the contract text alongside a structured zero-shot directive. Summarize this document in exactly 5 bullet points focusing on liability and termination clauses. The model processes the source text and abstracts the core legal clauses directly. During an interview, highlight this engineering trade-off. Choosing zero-shot for high-volume, standard tasks like summarization provides immediate cost and speed optimizations, whereas complex custom output formats would warrant moving to few-shot prompting.
Moving on to our next question, a model gives poor results when you provide only instructions. What could be the possible reasons?
When a zero-shot instruction prompt produces poor results, the failure typically stems from prompt ambiguity, cognitive task complexity, or knowledge gaps. First, instructions often suffer from an ambiguity bottleneck, where the prompt relies on subjective terms that the human understands but the model interprets broadly. Second, if a task involves complex multi-step reasoning, a simple instruction creates attention dilution. The model fails to allocate adequate attention to implicit intermediate steps. Third, if the output requires a highly specific style or schema that isn't fully defined in words, the model defaults to generic text. Let's analyze our example to see how this plays out in real applications. If you ask an AI assistant to simply write a quarterly business report, the instruction is far too broad. The model doesn't know whether you want a formal executive summary, a technical statistical breakdown, or an informal slide outline. As a result, it generates a generic, disorganized text block that fails business requirements. To resolve this without adding examples, you must eliminate ambiguity by providing granular instructions, define the persona, detail every mandatory section heading, prescribe the tone, and outline negative constraints. If performance still fails after tightening instructions, that signals that the task has crossed the boundary where zero-shot is insufficient and requires few-shot examples or chain-of-thought prompting.
Moving on to our next question, have you ever used a prompting technique where you didn't provide any examples? Explain your approach.
Yes, I frequently use zero-shot prompting, particularly when building low-latency API pipelines for standard classification and extraction tasks. My approach relies heavily on structural prompt engineering. When you don't provide examples, structural clarity is what anchors the model's behavior. I design prompts by combining system role definitions, action-oriented instructions, output constraints, and clear structural delimiters. Assigning a system role sets the domain perspective, while explicit constraints prevent conversational fluff. Using structural delimiters like XML tags ensures the model's attention mechanism clearly distinguishes operational directives from input data. Let's walk step by step through the sentiment analysis example. Suppose we process incoming product reviews like, "The camera quality is excellent, but shipping took 2 weeks." In my prompt structure, I enclose the review in XML tags like review/review. The instruction explicitly states, analyze the sentiment of the text inside the review tags. Respond with exactly one word from this list, positive, negative, or neutral. Do not include introductory text or punctuation. By combining XML isolation with strict output constraints, the LLM processes the contextual shift between camera quality and slow shipping, evaluates the dominant sentiment, and returns neutral with 0 extra tokens. In an interview, explaining this level of structural rigor proves that you write production-grade prompts rather than informal conversational text.
Moving on to our next question, suppose your manager asks you to reduce prompt length while maintaining good output quality. Which prompting approach would you recommend and why?
To reduce prompt length while preserving output quality, I would recommend transitioning to an optimized zero-shot prompting strategy. In production enterprise applications, every token sent in a prompt contributes directly to financial cost and processing latency. Few-shot prompts often consume hundreds or thousands of tokens just demonstrating example outputs. By stripping out those static examples and replacing them with concise, highly targeted zero-shot instructions, you eliminate context window bloat while maintaining strong model performance on standard tasks. Let's look at the financial and performance mechanics using our optimization example. Imagine a production endpoint running thousands of customer intent classifications per hour. The existing prompt uses 1,000 input tokens because it includes 5 detailed sample emails and responses. By refactoring this into a zero-shot prompt using precise rules, structured delimiters, and explicit categorization bounds, we compress the input down to just 150 tokens. That represents an 85% reduction in input token volume. Step by step, we audit the original examples, extract the underlying rules they were demonstrating, write those rules as clear affirmative directives, and test output accuracy against a benchmark dataset. In an interview, framing your answer around key production metrics, such as latency, token economics, and API cost reduction, demonstrates an engineering mindset that prioritizes real-world business impact.
Moving on to our next question, a user asks an AI model to translate English into Telugu using only instructions. Which prompting strategy is being used, and why is it suitable?
This scenario uses zero-shot prompting. It is highly suitable because language translation is one of the foundational, high-resource tasks that modern large language models are extensively trained on. During pre-training on massive multilingual corpora, models learn deep cross-lingual semantic representations. The mapping between English words, concepts, and target languages like Telugu is already encoded within the model's neural network weights. Therefore, you do not need to consume prompt tokens displaying translation memory pairs. A direct instruction is sufficient to trigger the correct linguistic transformation. Let's walk through how this works step by step in a real localization workflow. Consider a web platform translating interface strings, such as "Welcome to our website." In a zero-shot approach, you pass the prompt, "Translate the following English text into clear, natural Telugu." Text, "Welcome to our website." The model reads the input, maps the English semantic concepts to Telugu vocabulary structures, and returns the accurate Telugu translation directly. To improve quality further in zero-shot contexts, you can specify context nuances, such as requesting formal versus informal Telugu, or identifying the target audience. During an interview, mentioning that translation is an aligned, baseline capability of multilingual foundation models demonstrates a deep technical understanding of LLM pre-training dynamics.
Moving on to our next question, you're building a content generation system. The business team doesn't want to include sample outputs in the prompt. How would you handle this requirement?
When business constraints prohibit including sample outputs in prompts, the solution is to implement zero-shot prompting backed by an explicit operational style guide. When models lack visual or structural examples to mirror, they need detailed descriptive rules. My approach is to translate soft, subjective business requirements into explicit, hard rules inside the prompt text. This involves defining 5 core elements: target persona, voice and tone, structural layout, target reading level, and explicit negative constraints. Let's walk through this step by step using our e-commerce content generation example. Suppose the business team wants descriptions for a new line of running shoes. Instead of providing past written samples, we construct a zero-shot prompt that outlines exact parameters. Write a 100-word product description for a high-performance running shoe. Adopt an energetic, motivating tone targeted at marathon runners. Structure the output into 2 short paragraphs, the first highlighting ergonomic comfort, and the second highlighting speed and durability. Negative constraint: do not mention price, discounts, or competitor brands. The LLM follows these boundary conditions precisely, generating on-brand copy without ever needing reference samples. In an interview, emphasize that mastering negative constraints and clear structural boundaries allows you to maintain strict brand consistency using pure zero-shot prompts.
Moving on to our next question, can every NLP task be solved effectively without providing examples? Explain your reasoning with examples.
No, not every NLP task can be effectively solved using zero-shot prompting. While zero-shot prompting is highly effective for standard, high-resource tasks like translation, sentiment classification, and basic summarization, it encounters significant performance limits on complex or highly customized tasks. When a task requires adhering to a complex proprietary schema, executing multi-step domain reasoning, or mimicking nuanced corporate writing styles, written instructions alone often fall short. In these scenarios, providing concrete few-shot examples gives the model visual patterns to anchor its outputs. Let's step through our database extraction example to see why zero-shot breaks down. Imagine taking messy medical notes or legal contracts and converting them into a deeply nested JSON structure with specific key names, data types, and required array structures. Explaining a complex nested JSON schema purely in narrative text instructions creates extreme prompt complexity and frequently leads to missing keys or invalid syntax. However, if you switch to few-shot prompting and provide 2 clear examples showing the exact raw text alongside its target JSON output, the model easily infers the implicit mapping rules. In an interview, always present prompting selection as an architectural decision. Start with zero-shot for baseline capabilities, but pivot to few-shot or chain-of-thought prompting when structured accuracy and complex logic are mandatory.
Moving on to our next question, your client wants faster prompt execution with minimal token usage. Which prompting strategy would you recommend first, and what are its trade-offs?
I would recommend starting with zero-shot prompting, but I would explicitly outline the operational engineering trade-offs to the client. Zero-shot is the most token-efficient prompting method available because it eliminates the static payload overhead of sample responses. In production, shorter prompts directly translate to lower API costs per call and reduced prefill processing time, which drastically improves time-to-first token latency for end users. However, choosing zero-shot involves trading off structural stability for speed and lower cost. Let's walk through this trade-off step by step using a real-time customer service chatbot API. In a live support chat, users expect responses in under a second. Using zero-shot prompts keeps input payloads minimal, enabling the LLM to process instructions and begin streaming text almost instantly. The trade-off, however, is that without sample outputs anchoring the generation, response formatting can occasionally vary, and the model may misinterpret ambiguous edge case queries. To mitigate this without adding full examples, you must implement tight guardrails, strict delimiters, and systematic fallback logic. When answering this in an interview, frame your recommendation around balancing the production triad: cost, speed, and output accuracy.
Moving on to our next question, how would you explain the advantages of zero-shot prompting to a non-technical stakeholder or client?
When communicating with non-technical stakeholders, I avoid technical jargon like vector spaces or in-context learning and instead rely on intuitive business analogies. I explain that zero-shot prompting is like hiring a highly trained executive assistant. Because the assistant is already intelligent and well-educated, you don't need to sit down and show them 10 past examples of how to organize an email folder. You simply give them clear, direct instructions, and they get to work immediately. The key business advantages are faster time to market, lower operating costs, and extreme operational agility. Let's walk through our business deployment example step by step. Imagine a business team wants to build an automated email routing system to send customer inquiries to the right department. Under traditional methods, the team would spend weeks collecting, cleaning, and formatting hundreds of past email tickets to build training examples. With zero-shot prompting, we can write a clear instruction defining the routing rules and launch the system in just a few hours. This eliminates dataset preparation costs, reduces the ongoing cloud computing fees for every processed email, and allows the business team to adjust routing rules instantly whenever business needs change. Focusing your interview answers on tangible business metrics, like development velocity, cost savings, and operational simplicity, shows executive presence and strong technical communication skills.
Excellent. You've completed part 1 of our zero-shot prompting interview series. If you found this video helpful, please like, share, subscribe to SHR Trinity, and press the notification bell so you never miss our upcoming AI interview preparation videos. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.